The subject of this video is the structures that men and women have built over the ages that make a place unique. Every area of the Earth has its own character, depending on its environment. Our environment is a blend of our natural surroundings and those things we add to it.
What are some of Africa's most famous human-made landmarks?
One of the first African landmarks people think of are the Pyramids of Egypt, located on the west bank of the Nile River in northern Africa. Most of these pyramids were built during Egypt's Old Kingdom, which dates back almost 4,500 years. The most famous of the pyramids, called the Great Pyramids, can be found at Giza, near present-day Cairo. One of these, King Khufu's pyramid, is the largest one in the world. Other pyramids include the Step Pyramid of King Zoser, probably the oldest one in the world, and the pyramid at Dashur, which looks as if it's bent. The structures were burial monuments for the pharaohs and their relatives. The burial chambers of the pharaohs were deep inside the pyramids and connected with the outside by a series of tunnels and inner rooms. Many of the pyramids had temple complexes nearby, which were used for religious purposes. Also located at Giza is the Great Sphinx. A sphinx is a mythical creature with a human head and the body of a beast, usually a lion. The Great Sphinx was carved sometime around 2600 BC. It's situated near the three Great Pyramids. Its face is the face of Khafra, the pharaoh whose pyramid it guards. It also represents Horus, the sky god of the Egyptians. It's over 170 feet long and is about 66 feet high from the ground to the top of the head. Its nose is missing because it was used for target practice by soldiers many centuries later. Also in this region is one of the world's most important waterways, the Suez Canal. It connects the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. The total length of the canal, including the channels dug for ships to approach the canal at either end, is 105 miles. This sea-level canal was built by Ferdinand de Lesseps and opened in 1869. Approximately 60 vessels can make the 15-hour trip through the canal each day. Between Port Said at the northern end and Port Tawfiq, the southern terminus on the Gulf of Suez, which leads into the Red Sea. When large tankers began to carry oil and were too large to move through the canal, an expansion project to widen and deepen the canal in the 1970s enabled it to accommodate these large vessels. As we travel to southern Africa, we can view the ruins of the royal city called the Great Zimbabwe. Groups of Bantu people migrated to this area between the 4th and 6th centuries AD. They originally settled near the northern banks of the Zambezi River. Eventually, they started to build a permanent stone city near modern-day Masvingo. They called their city Zimbabwe, which comes from the two Shona Bantu words, Zimba for houses and Mabgi for stone. In the latter part of the 11th century AD, a group from the south called Karenge moved into the region and took over Zimbabwe and established their own capital on the same site. They called their city the Great Zimbabwe, and it became one of the largest and most impressive cities in Africa. This city flourished until the beginning of the 19th century.
What are some of the human-made landmarks of the South Pacific?
First, we'll head south to Sydney, Australia to visit its famous Opera House. The Sydney Opera House has a distinctive architectural style which resembles a series of massive wind-filled sails. Construction on this famous landmark started in 1960 and was completed in 1973. Designed by Swedish architect Jorn Utzon, this structure houses 4 auditoriums, including a fan-shaped opera theater which can seat about 1,500 patrons. The next place we'll visit in the South Pacific is Easter Island in the Pacific Ocean, about 2,300 miles west of Chile. This island has been made famous by the hundreds of giant statues that can be found there. Most of these statues, nearly 600 in all, are between 10 and 12 feet high and weigh up to 50 tons. It's thought that the early inhabitants, who probably settled from the Polynesian islands centuries earlier, carved the giant statues from the stone quarries located within the volcano on the island. Although many statues were found fallen over from their bases, some of the ones remaining upright still wear the round red crowns, which resemble the shape of the hairstyle worn by ancient Polynesian natives.
What are some of the human-made landmarks of the United States?
Unveiled in New York Harbor in 1886 is the Statue of Liberty. The statue was a gift from the people of France to the United States in 1876 to honor the United States' 100-year anniversary. The statue is just over 150 feet high. The outer shell is made of copper and was designed by Frederick Bartholdi. The wrought iron interior was created by Gustave Eiffel, the man who designed the Eiffel Tower in Paris. A testament to the freedoms of American democracy, the Lady with the Lamp was usually the first thing that immigrants saw as they arrived in New York. Another famous landmark in New York City is the Empire State Building. Completed in the early 1930s, this building was the tallest in the world until 1971. Excluding the television antennas on the top, it stands 1,250 feet high. Over the decades, millions of people have visited the observation decks near the top of the Empire State Building in order to look out over the skyline of New York. The next landmark we'll visit in the United States is located in Washington, D.C. It's the Washington Monument. This obelisk is about halfway between the Capitol Building and the Lincoln Memorial. The interior of this monument is hollow, and there are over 190 memorial stones set into the inner walls. These stones were donated by various individuals and groups. Its height is just over 555 feet, and it took 36 years to build. The cornerstone was laid on July 4, 1848, with the same trowel used by George Washington when he set the cornerstone of the Capitol Building 55 years earlier. An elevator can take you to the top of the monument, where you can get a magnificent view of Washington, D.C. If you travel westward from Washington, D.C., you'll encounter another of the unique landmarks in the United States, the Arch of St. Louis, the gateway to the West. Located on the banks of the Mississippi River, this structure is 630 feet high and constructed primarily of stainless steel. It was officially dedicated in 1968 as part of the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial to commemorate the opening and settlement of the West. As we venture to the West Coast, we'll come to one of the world's most famous bridges, the Golden Gate Bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge spans the entrance to San Francisco Bay, connecting the city of San Francisco with the city of Sausalito on the Marin Peninsula. The Golden Gate Bridge has a span of 4,200 feet, and its two main cables rise over 740 feet above the bay. Just east of the bridge lies Alcatraz Island, which was the home to one of the United States' most famous federal prisons, Alcatraz. Alcatraz was the first permanent military fort on the west coast of the U.S., and a military prison was built there in 1861. The Rock, as it was called, was a federal prison from 1934 until the government closed it in the early 1960s.
What are some of the human-made landmarks of Canada?
In Canada, we'll visit a major landmark that is actually an entire city. It's the city of Quebec, the oldest permanent European settlement in Canada. Located along the St. Lawrence River, Quebec was founded by French explorer Samuel de Champlain in 1608. He named it after an Indian name, Quebec, which means the place where the river narrows. The city covers an area of approximately 36 square miles. It's the only walled city in North America. The Citadel, one of Quebec's most famous landmarks, is actually a fort that was completed by the British in the early 1830s. It overlooks the city from the highest point on Cap Diamant. After losing the battle at the Plains of Abraham with the British, France was forced to turn Canada over to England. However, Quebec still seems French, since over 75% of the residents claim French ancestry.
What are some of the human-made landmarks of Latin America?
A couple of the landmarks we'll look at were created by native Indians that inhabited this region long before the Europeans came to explore and colonize. The first is Chichen Itza, a center for Mayan culture in the northern part of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Chichen Itza was the capital of that region during the 11th and 12th centuries. This name can be translated as the mouth of the well of the Itza. It began as a small village around 500 BC. 1,200 years later, it had become a major ceremonial and governmental center. The city had temples, palaces, and even an observatory to study the stars. A later group, the Toltecs from central Mexico, took control of Chichen and continued to build elaborate buildings, temples, and even ball courts for sporting events. A temple pyramid, referred to as El Castillo, was built to honor the Toltec god Quetzalcoatl, or feathered serpent. Many murals and wall reliefs tell of the history of the city and how it was organized. In the late 1100s, Chichen Itza was attacked and never regained its prominence as a major political center. The other ancient site we'll visit is Macchu Picchu, a town built by the Incas about 50 miles northwest of Cusco, the center of Incan culture in Peru. It's located on a high precipice between several mountain peaks in the Andes. Excavation on this site began after it was rediscovered by Hiram Bingham, an American archaeologist, in 1911. Well known for its stone buildings and terraces, a unique feature at Macchu Picchu is the Intihuatana, a carved stone that was enclosed by curved walls with windows. Some scholars who have studied the Incan culture suggest that this might have had some religious significance. The next Latin American human-made landmark we'll visit is Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. This very modern city occupies a portion of the otherwise untamed wilderness of the Central Plateau of Brazil. Brasilia is world-renowned for its futuristic design and daring architecture, much of it incorporating massive works of art. The master plan for the city was actually selected from entries in a nationwide competition. Construction began in the late 1950s with every facet meticulously supervised by architects Lucio Costa and Oscar Niemeyer. The Brazilian capital was officially moved from Rio de Janeiro to Brasilia in 1960. Superhighways were built to link Brasilia to other parts of the country, and these have opened up Brazil's vast interior to development. The last landmark we'll mention in this region is the Panama Canal. This artificial waterway across the Isthmus of Panama connects the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. It shortens the trip between both oceans by approximately 7,000 miles. The length of the canal is 51 miles. A trip through the canal takes anywhere from 7 to 12 hours to complete. Since the Pacific Ocean is higher than the Atlantic Ocean, the boats have to go through a series of locks. 3 such locks are the Gatun locks, the Pedro Miguel locks, and the Miraflores locks. The idea for this canal was first considered in the 1500s, but it wasn't until the late 1800s that better technology made the canal a real possibility. A French company began work on the canal in the early 1880s under the direction of Ferdinand de Lesseps, who had built the Suez Canal. Unfortunately, his efforts were stopped a few years later when disease and engineering obstacles led the French company to bankruptcy. In 1904, after Panama became an independent nation, the United States began work on completing the canal. It finally opened in 1914. It's still considered one of the greatest engineering feats ever accomplished. During this video, we have visited just a few of the unique places and landmarks that exist in the world. We've seen how man and nature have altered our landscape for hundreds and thousands of years. We hope that someday you'll be able to explore these wonderful and exciting places for yourself.